Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor John V. has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Assalamu alaikum, guys. How are you doing today? I will say salam to all the Muslim viewers and good greetings to all my viewers. Uh, Viewers, this is a special live stream. It is a panel discussion on the 1 year of the Israel-Hamas war, which started last year on October 7th, and it has resulted in the deadliest conflict for Palestinians in history. More than 41,000 people have been killed. Now, you can say that some of them may be Hamas members, maybe some 5,000 members, but what about the rest of the 36,000 people? Who are those people? Now, the opinions are divided on this war. Some believe that it is Israel's right to self-defense, and some think that it is genocide against innocent civilians. And today we have two special guests. One is our regular guest. He's Professor John V. He's a historian from Greece. He regularly appears on our shows. And then we have Miss Natalie Potter. We have these guests now. Let's start with Natalie. How are you, Natalie?
I'm not too bad. How are you?
I'm good. Natalie, it's been 1 year since the Israel-Hamas war began, and we know how it has resulted in the casualties of over 40,000, in fact, 41,000 civilians in Palestine. You can say some of them may be Hamas members, but the majority of them are innocent civilians. And we have seen how this war has expanded to Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and the entire Middle East. And in fact, we are also having the possibility of a third world war due to the conflicts between Iran and Israel. Now we know that Israel is backed by the Western bloc of US, UK, and the European Union, and the and many say that Iran is associated with BRICS, which is another superpower. So, what are your views on this entire 1 year of the Israel-Hamas war?
Yeah. I think obviously my government's complicit, and they've had to backtrack. They were trying to sort of, challenge the ICC's decision to have arrest warrant for Netanyahu. But obviously, the UK, Britain, England is signed up to international law, and they're just basically going against it by arming Israel. There's no excuses for it. So really, England is completely complicit. It's a joke. Anybody that respects international law, you can't possibly respect the British government. There's so many people just sick of our government just basically being war criminals, which is what they actually are. In the media trying to cover it up. But you mentioned about 40,000 people, but actually I think a lot of people estimate it's a lot higher than that. It's at least like 180 plus, just because obviously a lot of people under the rubble, a lot of bodies haven't been identified, there's people missing, so they can't actually give an exact death toll, but statistically looks like it's a lot. It's more like 200,000 probably plus, which makes sense if you actually look at Gaza. So I would say 40,000 is just a conservative figure there, but no, I think anybody that does the slightest little bit of research can sort of get a picture of what's going on, really. I mean, we don't, unless you just sit and believe the mainstream media narrative, which I actually don't think most people at this point do. I don't think so in England. Yeah, so it's still another year ahead, and it's expanding more, and basically our government are putting our own safety at risk as well, which is another thing, because we don't want to go to war. We especially don't want to help a genocidal regime like Israel. Definitely not. But I think a lot of people have realised that this has been going on for a long time, and we didn't realise because it's just been covered up. You know, the fact that I didn't know Israel was an apartheid state. I didn't know that there was illegal settlements that were expanding. I didn't know that children were getting detained in the middle of the night in the West Bank and ripped from the homes and interrogated in the middle of the night by a group of men. You know, I've got a child who's got autism and diabetes. I didn't know that children were ripped from the homes away from the parents in the middle of the night to be taken to some unknown military detention by an apartheid regime, sort of like be denied any human rights, be read the rights in Hebrew. And there's instances where children have been denied medicine and left disabled, you know, or died in Israeli like military detention. Children that have been deprived any basic human rights, and they've been basically tortured and sexually abused, and nothing comes of it. And then they may release them, they may not release them. They basically don't have any human rights. But to what they're doing to children as well is just something that I couldn't possibly imagine, that my own government would be completely aware of all of this and I'll be funding it, allowing it, and covering it up. So it's just like, I mean, there's that many human rights abuses. It's difficult to know where to start and what topic to even start about because there's so many. But it's the human rights abuses against children that is just something, as a parent, I just cannot accept. And, you know, it's really bad. So that's what I think.
Well, unfortunately, this morning we had an incident in Deir al-Balah, a city in the Gaza Strip, where there was a massacre. People were praying in the mosque and they were seeking shelter there, and more than 26 people were massacred. And it was a very unfortunate incident. So, do you have any views on that? It is just a continuation of, the 76-year-old conflict
It
between.
happens, I think, because it happens every single day. Every single day. Sometimes, I mean, I have been banned on X, but because it happens every single day, it's just not a surprise anymore. And it's not a surprise because it's just, I don't know how many massacres there's been. There seems to have been a massacre at least once every other day. And you can't keep track of them all because it's just constant. This is what's happening every other day. So it's not even like a surprise anymore. It's just this is.
Well, yes. Yes, I'm sorry, you can continue, please.
No, it's not a surprise because this is what's been happening every other day for the last year. So it's not surprising, and it's not going to stop by the looks of it because our politicians are just cowards and they're paid off. Sorry, that's my son coming home from school. So I don't know what
Yes, it's very.
I think that
It's a very
Macron.
bold statement that.
No, I think the one thing that does seem to be a bit newsworthy this week in terms of the Western government's stance is Macron basically saying, no more arms to Israel and trying to sort of get people on board with that idea. And that's a little bit hopeful. But I see that Israel's responded by blowing up a French, I don't know what exactly. But I think that that'll keep happening. Eventually, they will lose friends. They will just lose. They will just lose people that are on their side now. I think. I mean, I don't know, because France have been supplying them. Italy, England, Germany, USA obviously is um, the main one that's enabling Israel to do what it's doing. So I don't know if I mean USA's always seems. I don't think there's any red lines for the USA's. That it's just gonna. I mean, it's. I watch a guy called Greg Stoke. He's really informative. He's like a geopolitical analyst, and he's basically saying the USA haven't sent any like military person over there, but he's not sort of they're keeping an eye on that, because if they do sort of send that over, then it doesn't look good. But um, yeah. But the fact that Britain are involved as well with the intelligence and not just supplying the weapons, but also the help and support they're given from Cyprus as well. That's outrageous that our military are involved in the genocide, basically. That's just, I don't know how, as a British person, I'm supposed to respect the armed forces when they're involved in something like this. Like, how are you supposed to respect your own armed forces when they're involved in war crimes? I just don't see how that the two are compatible. Like, how do you respect that? And so, obviously, with people getting informed, they're going to lose respect for their own governments, which is what happens. And I think in the USA, there's a lot of people that are probably thinking, well, why do I want to die for Israel? Why do I want to die for a country that's basically doing what it's doing, while also, I mean, they've just had a catastrophe in North Carolina, and I don't think they're really doing much to help them, but yet they send billions to Israel. So I think people basically realize that it's not about anything other than Israel, for whatever reason. I don't know if it's because they've all been paid off. All the politicians have been paid off by AIPAC, so they're all just spokespeople for AIPAC. Congress is bought out by AIPAC and the ADL. So I think I don't know if I know people in America, and I'm sort of like, who are you voting for? And I'm still surprised that some of them are going to pick the two main parties. I just can't quite understand why they would do that. I'm thinking, well, why? Like, because they're not serving the public, and they're sending money to wars, illegal war. It's not in your interest to be voting for these people. So I just can't get my head around that. And you know, it's not. It's anyway. Yeah.
Okay, so you just said that your government is supporting the war crimes, your military, your governments, and all the people who are managing the country. Now, there is no difference in the policy of the government, whether it was Rishi Sunak's government or whether it is Keir Starmer's government, and the same goes for the US. Uh, whichever party is ruling the country, whichever party is in position, whichever president is in position, their stance has been the same since 1948. So, Professor Kofus, what is the reason that we have been witnessing that the UK government has been supporting the war crimes for the past 76 years? And what is the role of the royal family in it? I mean, is the royal family helpless in preventing these war crimes? What is their stance, and how the? I just want to understand uh, who is more powerful. Is the British royal family more powerful, or these prime ministers more powerful in decision making of the country?
Well, my position, first of all, I agree entirely with everything that Natalie just said, especially emphasizing uh, the war crimes and human rights violation and placing a great deal of focus on children. I think here we are in 2024, in the 21st century, and there is a country of about of 6 million Israelis, about that many more Palestinians. Here is a country who are second class citizens in an apartheid society. Here's a country which is tiny in the larger scheme of things. There are 8 billion people on this planet. Most agree with what Natalie just said, by the way, including in the Western world within varying degrees. Um, and yet, governments uh, do not represent the views of uh, their citizens. Um, this is very clear because governments, as Natalie pointed out, knowing about APEC and ADL, the fact is, the JDL rather, the fact is that there is enormous amount of campaign money that goes to elect politicians in the democratic Western countries, and that money, but it's the same thing in India, by the way, in other countries, in Brazil, and so forth. Um, that money is really what uh, influences public policy, whether it's domestic policy or foreign affairs. There have been in the last year a number of revelations through independent journalism, but some mainstream media here and there as well, revealing that some of the largest corporations, from Google to big banks, have an enormous influence and are very much on the side of the Zionist state. This is European as well as US, Canadian, Australian. And there are also individuals um, who are very much in favor of supporting Israel. So the question that you ask, whether it's individuals or corporate entities or governments, a very old question indeed about the role of powerful individuals and the corporate sector, the business sector. That's a very appropriate question. And the answer is revealed by the results. Uh, I look at I follow the trail of money and I look where it's headed, from the big pockets of corporations and billionaires who influence public policy, lobbyists who get the money from individuals and corporate entities, uh, funnel it to politicians who then determine public policy. In this case, of course, the policy toward Israel. And it is clear that their interests are with Israel because I have said this for decades, in fact, long before this war, that the Palestinians do not have leverage because the Arab world, the Muslim world in general, and this is has not been very much on their side at all. And one of the most amazing things to me in the last year is that indeed Muslim countries, at the very least, after they saw, as Natalie was pointing out, all the human rights violations, the children, and the war crimes, bombing hospitals, bombing mosques, and arguing, oh, they're hiding in there. But in the meantime, whoever is in there will kill. And by the way, those are just war casualties. Um, but we're really aiming for Hamas people, although they know that the hospital, there are doctors, nurses, and patience. They know that, and there's no way to sugarcoat this the way that the Western media has tried to do. And yet, again, as Natalie pointed out, there's no interruption of the military aid, by the way, also financial aid. Um, there are government guaranteed loans by Western governments to Israel. A lot of people may not be aware of this, but Western banks actually provide some of the loans for those settlements, which are illegal, have been declared illegal. I mean, this is not a secret. There are Western uh, corporate entities as well as individuals that invest in Israel. So Israel by itself, if you separate it out from the rest of the planet, may seem like a tiny entity, a rogue state out there committing war crimes. And according to both the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, it's guilty of war crimes. And of course, they have issued warrants for at least a couple of its top officials. And yet, they defy international law. They defy the United Nations. Just the other day, they criticized heavily the Secretary General of the United Nations and declared that he was banned from visiting Israel, which, of course, as a number of members of the generals of the not generals in the Security Council pointed out, this was a slap on the face of the United Nations, which represents the world, by the way. So why is this kind of defiance taking place? Because it's not just Israel; it's the entire Western world, which has a long-standing um, policy since 1948 of using Israel as a strategic partner during the Cold War, because there was the pretext of the Soviet influence in the oil-rich Arab world and in Iran, of course. Um, and then once that was over, there was the issue of terrorism. But again, I want to stress, I am amazed. I am utterly amazed. 1 year later, I have not seen much evidence from the Muslim world of doing something tangible. Yes, Iran is the exception. Even Iran has been very restrained. Even Iran has been very restrained. And here and there, you'll hear Western analysts admit that even people in government, Iran has been much more restrained than anyone expected. Um, I'm very disappointed that at the very least they didn't cut trade relations, cut off trade. Now, during the Yom Kippur War back in 1973, we had the oil embargo. There was at least that. Nothing now. Nothing. Turkey, which, by the way, um, Erdogan has been very vocal against Israel. Rhetorically, he seems to be on the side of Palestinians, and he is. I don't doubt his sincerity. However, um, his company, Turkey, does trades with Israel. He hasn't done much by way of some tangible policy. And to coordinate that, by the way, as Iran has been saying, let's coordinate a policy here. Let's have a coordinated policy regionally against Israel so they can back off. So if they're not going to do it, why should the West? And that's how I see this. Is 1 year later, here we are. They have killed a lot of children, a lot of women, a lot of innocent civilians, and of course, it's all in the name of self-defense. And the other day, I was watching a State Department briefing, and one of the reporters asked does Israel have the right to self-defense? And the answer of the State Department official was absolutely, and we support that, and we're right behind Israel. He asked the exact same question about Iran. Does Iran have the right to self-defense? And the answer was a non-answer. In essence, no, it does not have the right to self. And the reporter then answered for the State Department official and said, well, what you said in so many words is that Iran does not, that the US does not recognize the right of Iran to self-defense. So the double standard has been exposed to the world in the last year, especially since there is another war in Ukraine. And this can be attributed partly to racism, the concept of what the Palestinian American scholar at Columbia University used to call Orientalism, Edward Said. Part of that, part of this is racism, because here's a war that the Western world is looking at from the perspective of the aggressor, Ukraine from the perspective of the invaded population of the Ukrainians. So you have two wars, and one is viewed from the perspective of the aggressor, and the other is viewed from the perspective of the victims, which, by the way, the people, I believe, I agree with many scholars from, including Howard Zinn, who argue that all wars are against civilians in any case, from the ancient times to the present. Civilians wind up paying the price in any event. So that's my overview.
Well, I would say, do you know what the other thing as well? So racism, but also money. And what I'm doing at the moment is why I've got the Palestine flag on both my eyes, because I'm doing makeup with basically brands that have no direct, indirect corporate ties to Israel. And it's quite the rabbit hole. So once you start researching, you realize, actually, I would have never have thought this, but BlackRock actually have investments in Israel, but they also have investments in some of the big major makeup brands such as Estee Lauder, Coty, Unilever, and so there's another massive thing. And these brands have, or like that, they have all these other tiny subsidiary brands as well. So it's very difficult to avoid buying into that whole system. There's just so much money. It's the money trail as well. I think that's another major factor in it. And there's a lot of people, shareholders, stakeholders, that don't want to lose their investments and their money. And that's another, it's a massively complex web of money that you need to dig into as well.
Yes,
So
money is very, very significant. As you point, BlackRock, of course, is a giant firm, and it does have investments in a number of countries that are in Israel. Yeah, the profit motive is there, and there have been reports. There was one from your own country, Natalie, about um, a couple of companies, one in oil, the other in drilling, I guess, and a tech company. And in fact, the father-in-law of the former prime minister was involved in the tech company um, that was interested in a contract that Israel was offering just off the coast of Gaza for deep sea oil drilling and natural gas, I guess. So there is clearly, and then of course, besides that, there was, Jared Kushner openly, publicly. I don't know how he could have said this, but in any case, he did. Um, he talked about prime real estate that Gaza could offer opportunities for investors for luxury condos and apartments and so forth. So there have been a lot of reports about enormous amounts of money and contracts. And there is a web that's global
Mm.
through Israel. That's the thing, that from India to the west, to Western, down to Australia. So that web is very powerful. And when I'm retired now, but when I was in academia, I had a friend from Egypt, and he and I used to talk, and he would ask why has nothing been done since 1948, and I would tell him the same thing I said here. The Palestinians don't have any leverage because they're not backed up. I mean, look at this thing, 1 year, and you're waiting. Okay, maybe Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia, of course, is the key because they're the big dog in the neighborhood. Um, but nothing. I mean, it's just amazing. You would think now, even now that they bombed Beirut, looking for Hezbollah fighters down there, although they're very the vast majority are in southern Lebanon. Um, it's very clear there's not much support, and the lack of leverage is very important. While Israel has a lot of leverage precisely because of the things you were mentioning, Natalie, money.
That's,
I mean, people are not going to sacrifice money.
I actually think that's why Netanyahu is so arrogant, because he knows how much power is in money. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I think I found out about so many different brands that I had no idea were attached to BlackRock or other massive corporate investments that also invest in Israel. Um, and it's quite interesting once you dig into it, but it's keeping it sort of simple so that people can sort of not get too confused with all, because there's that many. Most major brands are not clean. That's what I've found. Most big brands are actually dirty, and they're invested in really bad stuff. Really bad stuff. I mean, genocide in Gaza, and but I mean, there was just I was quite shocked the things that I found out, like. But I think I'll save that for another video, because it's information overload, really.
You're absolutely correct. By the way, there have been, reports that some companies have lost a lot of money because they're doing exactly what you're just saying. There are people all over the world who are doing exactly what you're saying, namely not buying those products. And there
Mm,
are companies that have reported in their quarterly reports loss of revenue precisely because they're doing what you're doing on a world scale.
mm,
So that is something, the BDS movement, the boycott divest movement, is really very significant. I mean, I remember, back in the 1970s, the 1980s in South Africa, when Nelson Mandela was still, there were still negotiations whether to let him go, and finally they freed him. There was an international boycott, and they decided, okay, we'll let him out under certain conditions, and so the boycott there worked. There was people like you. I believe very strongly in grassroots movements, in grassroots organization. I think that's very effective. It has always been effective, and because that's what they understand. Because
yeah,
that's what they worship money. That's what they understand. Money moves everything. You can't buy those bombs that Israel is using to bomb Gaza and hospitals in Beirut unless you pay for that. That costs a lot of money. So, um, uh, very clearly, that's leverage that Israel has. Palestine doesn't have that. It could have had that, but it doesn't have
mm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's not many Palestinian brands. There are some, um, like there's the makeup that I've recently bought. Like, the founder's spoken out specifically against Israel, and she's pro-Palestine. So there's like a couple of brands like that. Huda Beauty. which is the lipstick I've got on at the moment. And she said, I don't want their blood money. And she's actually quite the competition for like a lot of the big brands as well. So they clearly see her as a threat. But yeah, most of the big brands are not good. So there's a lot of cheaper brands as well that are just as good quality, but most of the bigger brands are not clean. They are not. They don't have much in terms of human rights or anything really. But there are some. But I'm gonna do like a separate video for that anyway. Because I don't think you guys are interested in girly makeup and stuff. So
Well,
I'll probably bore you with all these different makeup brands and stuff. So there is a crowd that are interested though. So yeah, but I would say stay away from Moe Chandon. Stay away from anything to do with what is it? Bernard Arnold. He owns Estee Lauder, and he invests in Israeli tech, and he owns it's the Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, and so like Hennessy Cognac, Moet Chandon. Stay away from those two brands. I didn't know about that, you see, but that's when you like start digging and doing your research into these things. And he's like, I think Forbes, he's like one of the richest men in the world. So, but he's invested in Israeli tech, which is used against the Palestinians.
yes.
So,
High-tech company, yeah, that's true. They, without high tech, they wouldn't have been able to do a lot of things they've done as efficiently as they have done them. Killing people, an efficient killing machine. What they themselves, by the way, what many, and rightly so, many Israeli and Jewish scholars in the diaspora criticized about the Third Reich and the so-called efficiency of the killing machine of the Third Reich. So this, and now look at this stuff. It's really a tragedy, and it's not a lot of people in the last year in independent journalism could say, well, this is a tragedy of humanity. Honestly, I don't. I have said many times, I don't see it. I don't see. I can't blame the majority of of the world's population for what is going on here. I look at who, as you pointed out, specific people, specific companies would support economically, and then the state of Israel, governments behind which are specific individuals and companies would support the state of Israel and its killing machine. So there are specific um, players here. Um, the general population is not at fault. Just like um, it's Zionist, not all of the Jewish. I have many Jewish friends and contacts in many countries who are adamantly against what is going on. A woman who was a professor, I think, at either Penn State or University of Pennsylvania, just recently lost her job. She's Jewish. She lost her job because she was vocal and all she against Israel. And actually, in her courses, all she was doing is presenting the other view. What the late Edward Said argued that Western media rarely does is present the point of view of the Palestinians, give them a voice. And that's what she did in the classroom. There was so much pressure, they got rid of her. That's the other leverage that Israel has on a world scale, by the way, from down Australia to the West. Um, they use that, they use all means of pressure. And that's just, and they have been masters at the at the game of propaganda. By the way, people just eat up anything they serve. Not
well,
all. Yeah,
Ru-
go ahead.
Rupert Murdoch. is a friend of Netanyahu. And we all know who Rupert Murdoch is. And that's another thing that's come up. Now, I've been saying to people, oh, you don't believe the BBC, do you? And like, oh, Natalie, you know, it's like, well, the state regulated, and we all know that our government are complicit in war crimes. And people just kind of think, you know, she's a conspiracy theorist. This is like a year ago. And then also the fact, like, Rupert Murdoch and the amount of scandals, and I mean, most people would read it and think, you know, be a bit suspicious about the likes of Rupert Murdoch. A lot of people buy into it, but he's a friend. He's an acquaintance of Netanyahu. He's a
Yeah.
Zionist. So a lot of the mainstream media are all Zionists. The BBC, Talk TV, Rupert Murdoch. It's all about the money. It's and manipulation. Like, you're an anti-Semite if you don't like apartheid and the murder and starvation of children. No, it's not because I don't like Jews. It's because I don't like. Just because you're a Jew doesn't mean you can go around murdering children and stealing homes. And it doesn't give you the right to complete immunity just because your ancestors suffered something. It's absurd to even have that argument. It's just such a ridiculous argument that it's just nonsensical. I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you entirely. That's exactly right. Um, my ancestors suffered, therefore I am above the law.
exactly. It's insane. It's just it's a manipulation tactic. That's all it is. But they've manipulated. They've sort of a bit like it's and they've put any criticism of anything Israel does has to be associated with the criticism of Jews. That has to be. So that's why people don't say anything. But I mean, yeah, no, I think most. Sorry, I had a phone call then. Most people now just sort of talk about what's happening and see what's happening because I don't. The mainstream can't even hide that much anymore.
Yeah.
But you know,
The,
there are people that just. Unfortunately, I know people, and they're still not really aware of what Zionism is, for example.
no, yeah,
Um,
they,
so
yeah.
just
That's part of the problem. You're absolutely right. Is they don't do their own independent search to find out for themselves the 18th century ideal of the Prussian philosopher Immanuel Kant. Think for yourself. Don't accept everything by authority. They don't do that. They instead um, accept the. However, I believe that according to public opinion polls, gradually in the course of this one last year, in this is in the Western world because the global South is clearly not with Israel, but in the Western world, public opinion has swung the other way. Um, did we lose Natalie?
no, sorry, I'm just checking who was calling. My apologies.
Oh, okay.
I can still hear everything.
No, okay, good, good. So the one issue here uh, is indeed the indoctrination of the public. Israel. In fact, Assad shared a very good video with me and others a few days ago. I believe it was by CBS News in the United States. An excellent work after 1982 when Israel bombed Beirut, and of course there were a series of problems. Here we have Israel putting together rather a team of some of the best executives from the United States and some of the Western European countries, sitting down and carving out a strategy on mass marketing of Zionism, essentially, and the apartheid state, and how to sell that. And this self defense, I have the right to self defense. This argument, which you know, you can't possibly um, um, understand because they deny the same privilege to everybody else. They want self-defense. They want self-defense. And then when you ask, do any of the Muslim countries in the region have the right to self-defense? Does Lebanon, does Iran, does Syria, does Iraq? They That's when they back off. And this is not just them, it's also the Western countries, especially the United States. The hypocrisy in this last year, the world found out so much about the hypocrisy of the so-called democratic and civilized world. I'm amazed that people still believe that the country that's civilized is the country that's engaged in genocide, and that the barbarians are the victims. That's just amazing to me. The world turned upside down. They're the barbarians, the people who just eliminating them. So ethnic cleansing is now part of the civilized democratic society. Ethnic cleansing is, and that's what they're defending. And I'm also amazed that Israel has has manipulated the Western constitutions. In the United States, where I lived for a long time, I was just uh, shocked to see that Congress went after people exercising a First Amendment right, free speech, and punishing people, graduates of universities in law, for example, or in medicine, uh, telling them you're not going to get a job, at least not in a firm that's pro-Israel. Uh, this is so the values of the Western world, the so-called democratic, civilized Western world, have been manipulated because of this genocidal war in Israel in this last year, and the level to which they're manipulated has amazed me. That because they allow no other country to do that, but they have allowed Israel to do this, and that in itself is shocking. That they would allow Israel, and for what? All of this could have been settled politically, all of it, and with much more constructive results. Um, and we know because State Department officials have resigned over the lies of the top brass, namely the Secretary of State in cooperation coordination with the National Security Advisor and the White House, the lies about ceasefire proposals. The fact is um, they were not serious, or they were lying about that. This idea, oh yeah, for peace, the peaceful West. They're not. They're warmongers. They're not. They're not for peace. Eh, The, we have to judge everyone and every entity, every government by the actions and the results of their actions, and that record is incontrovertible. You can't argue against the results of what has happened in this last year, no matter the rhetoric that they're civilized, they're democratic, they're advanced. The others are the others are the terrorists. At the United Nations, when I watch Security Council meetings, they're the terrorists. They should be ashamed. They're sitting over there. Should not even be sitting over there. The Israeli representative, and of course the U.S. and some of the Western Europeans. They're terrorists. They're the terrorists, right? And then Israel already with International Court of Justice and International Criminal Court rulings against it is the democratic, civilized society, and in the name of its ancestors who were obviously wrongly persecuted, and um, I entirely agree and support that contention that that was wrong and should never happen. But the West again allowed that to happen for those who know what the history is, and the West would not take European Jews, especially German Jews, while the Palestinians welcomed them, by the way. Natalie, would you, how, well, I wanted to ask you a question. I used to come to England every year for 25 years because of my work, my research. I used to go out to Kew Gardens where the Public Records Office is. How do people, I mean, today is the anniversary, the first anniversary of this war. How do people in, um, in towns and in neighborhoods and over, over discussions feel about all of this? That do they feel helpless? Is there a sense of fatalism? Oh, there's nothing I can do.
I might say something that doesn't sound too diplomatic, but most people are ignorant, and they're so busy going about their own exhausting lives, they're not interested, and it's very sad and frustrating. So I think that's why I am even more driven to sort of annoy people by trying to educate them all the time. But I did try to tell people last year. I've got a Palestinian friend which I barely speak to much anymore. We just lost contact, but sometimes we'll speak. So I knew a little bit. I didn't know the extent to everything, but I did have a conversation with actually my own mother, and she was completely unaware of anything. And trying to sort of say to people, well, actually, it wasn't, it was almost like she'd watched the BBC and there was this terrible thing that had happened. And I had to sort of explain to her that, well, actually, Palestine are under an occupation, legal occupation, by the way. It's illegal, and it's, you know, the highest court in the world says, well, no, this is illegal. The expansion of the settlements are illegal, and all of the human rights abuses towards children, civilians are illegal, and the illegal siege in the Gaza Strip. And then you've got the argument of, oh, well, they pulled out in 2005, and it's like, no, they didn't. They still have these watchtowers, and they still control all the supplies and dependent and medication. They still control all the food, the electricity, the water. They're under this blockade, so they can't have airports, they can't escape, they can't move. They've got watchtowers. It's like, it literally is a concentration camp. And if you actually, it's like, well, okay, the Israelis are keeping the Palestinians in this horrible, oppressed situation in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. So it's a complete lie when they say that they pulled out in 2005 and they were free. No, they weren't. And, there is no argument for Israel. What the Palestinians did on October the 7th was self-defense. It was self-defense. And let's not forget all of the lies that were told on October 7th. The lies, the fake beheaded babies, that was all fake. It's all lies. The rapes was lies. None of that happened. And that was part of their propaganda machine. And unfortunately, a few people still believe it, but a lot of the politicians are still spouting the same propaganda. But the week before, like a few days before October 7th last year, there was children being shot dead in the West Bank. Palestinian children being detained and shot dead. This is a fact. I've looked it up. And they were kept in horrible conditions in the Gaza Strip. They were, under an illegal blockade. So what the Palestinians did on the 7th of October was self-defense. There's one occupier, and that is the Israelis. And, there comes a point where, of course, they'd had enough. The Palestinian people have a right to freedom. They have a right, and it was a last resort. So I'm sorry to say I support the Palestinians and what happened on October 7th, because it was self-defense, and anybody would do that. Anybody would do that. You listen to some soldiers and they'll go off to, a lot of, I feel sorry for a lot of the people in Britain who have joined the armed forces, and they went under false pretenses, under lies to Afghanistan and Iraq. We all know what happened because we all know why Julian Assange was in prison. We all know now. The proof is there. We all know it was a pack of lies.
Mhm.
You know,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
but like these soldiers now look, oh wow, I was involved in horrible war crime, and they have to live with
Mhm.
that. The government's put on the what I'm saying, like, is they think that, you know, some of them might have an opinion like, oh, you know, I was like a war hero. It's like, no, you actually weren't a war hero. You went to a war in another country under false pretenses, and yet for some reason some of these people have an opinion against the Palestinians who tried to basically fight against illegal oppression, and yet they get deemed terrorists for doing that. That's insane to me. I mean, to me, a terrorist would be somebody who goes to another country and starts committing a genocide. That's a terrorist. A terrorist isn't somebody who defends their right to exist, which is what
Yeah.
the Palestinians did. They
Yeah.
defended to have human rights, the right to exist, the right to have human rights. They were the ones under an occupation. They were the ones denied rights. They were the ones with the children being. It was never the Israelis. So I'm very, very outspoken. I don't pussyfoot around and tiptoe around the subject. I'm like, actually, people need to know the truth. If somebody was pushing me out of my house, if somebody was keeping my child in prison,
That's very good. That's very good. Yeah,
if
that's exactly what it is. That's how people should think.
then
That's
I would
exactly right.
say, and anybody who says they wouldn't, they would just be oppressed indefinitely. It's insane. You know, most people, and I speak to most people, they would say, if anything happened to my children, I would fight. And I'm like, well, yeah, if anything happened to my son, I would fight. So why shouldn't the Palestinians be able to fight back? They have every right to fight back. And it didn't. And yes, the week before, on October 7th, there was like kids getting detained, shot at in the West Bank. And this is all true. It's all factual. So mainstream won't cover that. They're just, you know, they're just ignored. And I think that is so wrong that they're just ignored because, you know, there wasn't even children that like died on October 7th. Well, there was actually, but again, Israel wouldn't allow an independent investigation at all. They refused the United Nations to do an independent investigation. They refused Amnesty International. They refused to let any, and they refused to submit evidence to the International Criminal Court. They refused to submit any of the evidence. So we can't believe anything that the Israeli government says because they haven't provided any evidence. In fact, if anything, there's evidence to say the Hannibal Directive was used on October 7th is overwhelming to say that the majority of people killed on October 7th was by the Israeli government, and that is even by some Israeli people themselves. So that's another thing that most people don't know. Apache helicopters were used. Israeli eyewitnesses, you know, Apache helicopters were used. They killed their own, and they already ordered the admit. So none of the things that were said were true anyway, and there's enough evidence out there if you look. But yeah, I could go on. It's just, I think people sort of, it will come. It's just a matter of time.
Hassan?
Okay, so well, there is the link to join the live stream. It is the link of the StreamYard. If anyone wants to join it, you can click it, and it is available in the comment section. There is one thing that many people are afraid of, and that is the establishment of a greater Israel. And I will save it that for another session on Levin Storm, which will be available tomorrow. And Professor Kopis is going to explain in detail what Levenstorm is about and how Greater Israel is a part of Levenstorm. Uh, and I think that our guests have beautifully explained the plight of Palestinians the illegal occupation and the continuation of the genocidal war crimes, and they don't stop. They don't seem to be stopping in the near future. The numbers of the victims of the genocide are increasing day by day, and Israel has crippled its economy. Israel has, people are escaping the country in large numbers, but they are still continuing this genocide, despite the fact that the world is now against them. Uh, it's the country is in trouble, but they are not stopping it. I don't understand what is their motive. I don't understand if they have achieved their goals or not. What do you say? So,
Yeah, I don't think, historically, every country before every country goes to war, it has war aims, whether they're they're discussed among the strategies or not. The war aims of Israel, the interesting thing here, as declared, because there were, of course, we found out in the course of this last year that the declarations were false. The war aims were intertwined with Netanyahu's own personal legal troubles, by the way, because he was in trouble with the law inside his own country. Um, and of course, there was a segment of the population that was against him within his own country, as well as in the diaspora, okay, questioning how he was handling the Palestinian question. So that's one dimension. The other dimension is, what was the war aim? The state. We're going after Hamas, they're terrorists, we want to wipe them out. What is the result 1 year later? What's the result? As both of you guys mentioned, the result is they killed 40, so far 42, and it's rising, 42,000. And most of those, as the United Nations keeps saying, are children and women and civilians, of course. And they have no boundaries, as Natalie pointed out. They have no red lines. They bomb anything. Initially, I don't know if people remember, but this is a long time. I remember the first time they bombed the hospital. The initial reaction was, we didn't do it. They bombed their own hospital. And the US immediately comes out, the State Department press secretary comes out, yes, Israel is right. And then the US media picks it up. Oh, yes, of course, they're right. Then the Western media picks it up. Of course. So they all go along en masse, right? Now, uh, everybody's blasé about Israel bombing mosques, hospitals, schools, killing press, killing journalists, shutting down Al Jazeera, for example, one of Al Jazeera's stations, because Al Jazeera, of course, has been critical of Israel, going after United Nations staff, going after medical staff. They have no boundaries. And the amazing thing to me is that I cannot think of any country in modern history having a carte blanche that can do anything. It doesn't matter. They can kill children. I think I mentioned this to you when we were discussing Immanuel Kant and his ethics. Asad, the issue of you have to have at least, even if you're a moral relativist, you have to have some boundaries. We have to say, okay, we agree not that killing babies is morally repugnant. It's wrong. We at least that. In the case of Israel, everything, anything, and everything goes, and that is amazing. And a year later, we look at whether they have achieved their war aims, and they have not. According to them, according to what they say, they haven't, because their war aims are really ethnic cleansing. Their war aims are to get rid of, and they have always been that, by the way. If you go back in one of the sessions I did, I point out that if you go back to Moshe Sharet's premiership, the second prime minister of Israel, 1955, when Moshe Dayan was the army chief of staff. They discussed this idea of greater Israel, of getting rid of all the Palestinians out of Israel and carving out sections from Syria to Lebanon to Iraq, Transjordan, Jordan, even Saudi Arabia, a segment of Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Their goal was always to get rid of the Palestinians. That was the real war aim. And because they saw that there was insurmountable pressure from the world community, here we are a year later saying, well, we're going to, Netanyahu just the other day comes out and says, we're going to go all the way with this. In other words, a military solution rather than a diplomatic settlement of this, uh, no matter what it takes. Meaning, okay, we're going to continue genocide, is what he was saying, because that's what the international community, the World Court, has deemed that this is genocide, and so they're continuing. That's and Natalie, you pointed out a lot of people are blasé, but that's what they're counting on. They're counting on people being apathetic about it. Now, there were some demonstrations in a number of capitals today. There were in some cities around the world. But there were also, by the way, there were pro-Israel uh, protests as well. Yes, in Berlin, for example. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
I was
So
about
go ahead.
like with the I listen to Greg Stoker when I can. He's smart. He understands sort of military operations, things that I don't quite get, but it's very interesting. But he's basically saying that, as you were saying about them, the larger Israel, and so they went into Lebanon, and the ground operation has clearly failed because there's a lot of casualties because they basically Al Qassam brigades and basically said, they put out public statement and they've lost a lot and they don't like to admit it. So they are actually incompetent as a military, which doesn't surprise me when you actually listen to these people speak. So the only way they know how to fight is to bomb. And so that's exactly what they're doing because they can't win on the ground because they're incompetent and they're not sophisticated and trained like Hezbollah are. They are losing, so that's why they do the bombing campaign. It's basically cowardice as well. That is another thing, and that's not me saying that. That's an ex-marine saying this. I'm not, just coming up with this stuff myself. So
No, that's absolutely true. That, in fact, there have been reports just yesterday. I found out from a friend from Washington D.C. That they have quite a few Americans involved in operations, um, logistical stuff, advisors, so forth. The U.S. government likes to give the title military advisor, when in fact some of those are actually, um, I would say, quite active. And the military hardware that you pointed out comes from a lot of, and you mentioned earlier, a lot of it. A number of Western countries, including Italy, have been giving them weapons. Some um, reluctantly, but still they give them because the U.S. uses all kinds of pressure. For example, if you want to get a World Bank or an IMF loan, you got to give weapons to Israel. You got to sell them weapons. Um, Otherwise, you're not going to get that loan. So they've done a lot of. There's been a lot of that in the last year. But we come back to the issue which is, what is the result a year later? Israel has not achieved its war aims. Just today, by the way, there was a barrage of fire coordinated by Hamas and Hezbollah. So you know, um, the idea that they've been all these declarations. Oh yeah, we're nearly uh, there in terms of destroying both Hezbollah and Hamas. Well, just today on the anniversary, we find out, of course, that's far from the truth. As you point out, as your friend, the Marine person was saying, yeah, they're not that effective at all, and they are actually arrogant enough to in the initial phases of this. Natalie, you remind me when you said they're looting. They were actually videotaping what they were doing, which was going. I don't know if people remember. They were going taking babies like toys and looting women's stuff and dressing like as Palestinian women. I don't know if people remember. And they were actually videotaping, and then of course that goes out to the world. And I'm thinking, this is the professional, the best army in the world, the IDF.
It's
Uh,
not, but it was just that. I mean, the propaganda, like there was a couple of specific things. One of them was I can't remember his name, but to actually believe, I mean, there was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and the doctor's names, and he points to the Arabic writing as if nobody understands Arabic, and he says, there's the name of the hostages and Hamas, and everybody's like, some people can actually read Arabic and they understand that you're lying. And so the fact that they've basically exposed themselves to be nothing but liars and passes under a hospital, which obviously, I mean, it's insane. And then there was guns. I think they wouldn't let any independent journalists in to the hospital time, which is no surprise because they didn't want to be caught out in a lie. And then there was an MRI scanner, which initially had no gun, and then there was guns behind it, and then they recorded something later, and it's all orchestrated. And they went, "Look, we found Hamas's guns." And that's video that's been circulated virally all over the world. Don't take my word for it. So that's another fact that they lied, because you can't have an MRI scanner with loads of guns behind it that works. You don't, because it's metal. There was, and the fact that there was different staged scenes. There was so many bits of evidence. If you're a detective, you could, okay, that's a staged scene because that can't possibly be right there. And there was just so many indiscrepancies that it almost got comical. And I think there was another water well outside of a hospital where they said, "Oh, look, it's a tunnel. It leads to the Hamas tunnel." And it was a water well, and it was proven to be a water well. Just so many things like that. So many lies that have come out of Israel, so many lies that have come out of the IDF that you can't believe anything they say. It's just take our word for it. Don't ask for evidence. If you want evidence, then you're an anti-Semite, and that's basically the way they are. That's how it is.
and actually, marketing firms and advertising firms have been advising them for years on using those strategies to vilify the critic of Israel and immediately neutralize the critic. So, for example, if you call for peace in Ukraine, you're a patriot. If you call for peace in Israel, you're a traitor.
Mm.
That is part of that goes way back to when they hired these Western advertiser executives. And again, Assad sent me the video, and I watched it, and I figured. And one of those people was an executive for a very large firm for major corporations, multinational corporations. He was very effective, by the way, as a commercial, in doing convincing people to buy beer, which, what does beer have to do with the apartheid state? But yet he provided a lot of advice that was very useful to the Zionist state. Um, so, and as I'm just going to mention this one thing, because I have to say this. The Third Reich actually used Madison Avenue advertising firms to craft its propaganda. A lot of people are not aware of that. They actually use New York advertising firms' strategies. So now Israel is resorting to some of the advertising firms, not just of Madison Avenue, but Western Europe as well, because Western Europe has come a long way since the interwar era, and they have some very good firms. But they are masters at this, and the the sad thing is that even newspapers that claim, like the New York Times, for example, to check their sources have fallen for a lot of fake stories, what Noam Chomsky calls manufactured consent. They manufacture. Israel is the master of manufacturing consent. Uh,
Probably boils back to money because they pay people off. They're very cynical. I really think that there's a lot of Zionist Jews that say Zionist Jews because they are Zionist. They are those, and also the Federal Reserve is literally run by Zionists. This is really true. I mean, um, this isn't a conspiracy theory. If who owns the money, there's a lot of Zionists, probably about eight.
yeah.
So
Uh, by the way, there are Christian and there are Christians, non-Jews, not just Christians, but also Hindus, who support, by the way, the Zionist project. So the fact is, I mean, again, I'm going to go back to Noam Chomsky, who did a thing on this, how Zionism has managed to be so successful precisely because it transcended Judaism and it went right into other faiths, and especially the Christians. Transcending Judaism was a master stroke of genius on the part of the Zionist propagandists to convince the Christian elites among politicians, military people, and of course Wall Street, and in the case of the Europeans, the individual markets, whether in London or Paris and so forth. That also was a stroke of genius on their part because public manufacturing consent is very important. They're afraid. A lot of people believe that I'm just a small person, or I'm just a, what do I have know, I'm just going to mind my own business. But actually, they're afraid of the public. They're afraid of democracy. These people are not in favor of democracy. They're afraid of democracy, afraid of people speaking out and saying genocide is wrong. Killing children is not right. No one can possibly defend genocide. No one. And yet they have managed to always distract by saying, well, we're dealing with terrorists. You know, never mind the genocide, we're dealing with terrorists. We lost the subject. Anyway,
No, I'm here. You can continue, sir. You can continue. Yes, I'm here.
um, I did want to. I did see an article in CNN this morning, and it just struck me that CNN, which of course Al Jazeera had a very interesting article on how CNN has been covering for the state of Israel. But in this particular article, CNN pointed out that it's very interesting. Pointed out that according to the research, the entire Middle East has not been as um, destabilized as it is today since the Yom Kippur War back in the fall of 1973 and the ensuing oil crisis, the energy crisis of the 1970s. And for CNN, which is as pro-Zionist, you can get to candidly admit, look, this is destabilizing. This is not going well. The other thing that struck me, another story I was looking at, I always look at establishment and the other side, that is to see how they cover. For the IMF, for example, I looked at what is the International Monetary Fund saying about the impact of this war on the regional economy, the world economy. It's very pessimistic. According to the IMF studies that their own staff have done back in Washington, um, what Israel has been doing in this last year has had, combined with the other war up there in Ukraine, it has had a devastating impact on the civilian sector of the economies around the world, actually, around the world, from China to here. So this is not that no one is paying the price, it's just the Palestinians. It's the world that's paying the price for this a lot. And coming from the IMF, it carries a lot of weight because people figure, okay, the IMF has legitimacy. Now, if I had said it, it would mean absolutely nothing because no, who is he?
As I'll give you a specific example of what you're saying. For example, I think there's been oil tankers, ships going to Israel, British, and they have been bombed by Yemen. And if I see that, I'm like, good. You know, I'm actually like rooting for the Yemenis. Like, absolutely. I don't want to. Did they, you know? And the Yemenis specifically said, we won't bomb any ships as long as you're not going to Israel. We will let you pass. But British ships decide, okay, we want to still be with Israel. They go there and they get bombed. When I see that, I'm like, I'm absolutely, totally think it's right, and I'm all for it. But that's an example of what you're saying. It's like, and imagine like the oil in the ocean now. It's like, obviously, it's really bad for the environment. But yeah,
Yeah, the Red Sea issue is with the Houthi rebels. I forgot about the Houthi rebels. Yeah, down in Yemen, they support, of course, the Palestinians, and they have been actively supporting the Palestinians. Both, it's not just that Israel has bombed Yemen; it's also the UK and has fired back, as well as the United States and its allies. Yemen is a war-torn country. It has suffered a lot. If people go do a brief search, they'll find out that it's one of the poorest countries on the planet. It has a huge problem uh, with poverty rates because of the civil war, because of the pro-Iranian Houthi rebels against the pro-Saudi um, regime. However, they have come together on this issue. And one of the things that governments in Arab countries are afraid of is their own people. Their own people are on the side of the Palestinians. They are not on the side of their governments, who rhetorically talk the good game, as we say one thing, oh, of course, we're against Israel and so forth, and then do not carry out a policy that reflects the rhetoric. And like you said, they don't have to go to hyperboles like Erdogan. Oh yes, if you continue, we're going to war against. How about Erdogan allowing there's a humanitarian ship carrying aid up in, I believe, in Istanbul, and he won't let it go. He won't let it go down to Gaza. So the fact is that they are afraid of their own people, though, and that's why the rhetoric. They're afraid that the people are on the side of the Palestinians and not on the side of the governments. Um, and the Western governments, I think, are afraid of their own people. They know that they read the public opinion polls like everybody else. They initially, in the United States, which has historically been pro-Israel, yes, there was sentiment that was heavily pro-Israel, but gradually it shifted. And The U.S. has elections coming up with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and a lot of voters are going to stay away from the Democratic Party precisely because of the way that Democrats have handled this. This has been a disaster. No diplomatic solution for Ukraine, no diplomatic solution for Israel. Forever war doctrine on the part of the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and some of the State Department top brass and the Pentagon over there. This is it's just war is a way of life. This is absurd. It serves tangible interests. If I were McDonnell Douglas and some of the Raytheon and some of the large defense contractors, I would be happy because the stock value would be going up. But the rest of the civilian economy is suffering. This doesn't help the rest of the civilian economy. Yes, there are some high-tech companies besides defense. There are the energy companies because of the swings in the oil prices, especially combined with the Ukrainian war, given that Russia is a major producer of oil and there have been sanctions against Russia. But this has a destabilizing effect, going back to the CNN story, not just on the region, but on the world. We all feel it. Inflation has been real in Europe. I'm in Europe, and and I talked with people from a number of countries. In the Germans are very upset. I have some German friends. They're not happy at all with what's going on.
So who blew up Nord Stream? I think
Yes.
that has been so I don't know how many people know about all that at the moment, but that's something that's been kept quite quiet, hasn't it? So, but
Mhm.
that, I mean, I won't go too much off on a tangent, but when you were saying about the prices of oil, it's a very, very devious game that these people are playing, because it's all about the money and who controls the oil. But obviously, I think if you have control over people's finances, you have control over them. I think that's what it boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah, you control their lives. You
Mhm.
control their lives.
Sir,
Uh,
you just mentioned that Zionism. Yes, do you want to say something?
no, no, no. I was just
Okay.
merely calling your name.
Okay. So, you just mentioned a point, and it raised an important question, and that was that Zionism has transcended Judaism. Uh, and there is a conflict which we often see in Israel, and there is a section of Jews who is opposed to the entire concept of Zionism and the policies, the aggressive policies of the State of Israel against Palestinians. These are called Orthodox Jews or Haredi Jews, who believe that the their Messiah will come, and that Messiah will help them create a state of Israel. They have been punished by God due to their sins, and they need to wait for the Messiah to create their state. Unfortunately, the Zionist movement did not wait for the Messiah, and it resulted from Haskalah. It was a movement in Europe. It was similar to Renaissance in Europe. And so, what is your take on that? The Haredi opposition to
I,
the Zionism and the
you
Israeli
mean what?
aggression.
What is my view about its future prospects? Where is it going? Is that the question? Are you asking where is this headed? What is that? What
Yes,
you're?
I also want to know. Do you agree with it? Do you agree with it? And where is it headed? What is the future of the Haredi Jews regards to the Israeli, the future
Uh,
of Israel? Uh,
mhm.
and yes, there is another important point which I would like to add, that
Good.
Haredi Jews cannot be included in the Israeli army. They signed an agreement with the
Yes.
government of Israel, and when this war started, only a few Haredi Jews joined the army. Rest of them did not join the army. Will they be forced to join the army in the future? And what is their future in this? entire conflict?
I honestly, I mean, that's a very good question. It requires a lot of a lot of work there too. The fact is that Israel has never been a um, a secular, democratic, multicultural, multi-ethnic, um, uh, open society. Never. It was always a society that was by design a Zionist project. Okay, they created the facade of democracy and advertised. I hope the audience recalls that Israel, and they still say this, by the way, used to say, "Oh, we're the only democracy in the Middle East. We're the only democracy in the Middle East." By the way, I want to remind the audience that before Nelson Mandela, South Africa down there used to say that they're democratic, and they had the vast majority of the population, okay, as second class citizens without rights that the whites enjoyed, excluded from the mainstream, marginalized. Now, within my point about Zionism having transcended, Zionists were going all, they were not interested. Any opposition, even within the Jewish population, by the way, they will crush. Any, so the the transcending part that I mentioned was to go to the elites. And as Noam Chomsky pointed out in his work, in the United States, they managed to go all the way up to presidents and, um, entice them into the Zionist. Biden, no one forced him to say, I'm a proud Zionist. No one forced him to say that. And he said it. Okay. Um, there's one issue, which is, yes, he has taken, when you follow the money, the old American saying, follow the money, follow the money. He has taken enormous amounts of money from AIPAC, okay, and from Zionist billionaires and so forth. But there are also, and I have said this on many occasions, you know this, Assad, that there are also non-Jewish Zionists who are adamantly in favor of the Zionist state. And the question is why? Now, Natalie points out the profit motive, and she's right, the profit motive. There is also something else, that the Israelis are regarded as part of the Western collective bloc, white Europeans, Palestinians, Middle Eastern. The reason I mentioned Edward Said and his theory of Orientalism is partly because of that. So there is that element, okay? And then there is the element of Islamophobia, okay? The years ago, when I used to write for a Dutch journal, I argued back then that the one of the successes of the Zionist project has been uh, to to convert gradually anti-Semitism and to have people turn that into turn that into Islamophobia. Okay, and they were very successful, especially after the 9/11 incident that took place, the terrorist attack in New York and Washington, Philadelphia. So that has been successful, and people don't even question it. You got to go back, of course, to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, because after that, the West turns increasingly against Islam, but especially after 9/11. So the what we have is a predisposition on the part of the Western elites, which manufacture consent through the media, corporate media they control, convincing not all people, but a segment of the population that those people are white Western Democrats, even though they have an apartheid regime. So were South African, so were the Afrikaners, okay, the white South Africans. But they accepted them until there was enough corporate pressure on them that they let Mandela out, and they um, finally accepted the reality that actually this vast majority of the population, which is native to this land, not the Europeans, okay, have rights as human beings, as the Geneva Convention of 1949 states. So there is that element. I think that the prospects of Zionism are good if the state of Israel becomes even more authoritarian, more rigid in its apartheid policies, more militaristic, and that depends on the West, especially the United States. I think they're not very good, and I have said for many, many years, long before this, that if Israel finally settles this issue, let's say they go along with the two-state solution, that many in the Security Council, of course, just this past week called for it and have been calling for. If they go along with that, and the Palestinians finally find peace and quiet and begin to focus on developing their creative potential and productive potential, I think you will see internal discord within Israeli society. Exactly what you, Assad, are pointing out. That they will then, all of that has been suppressed, and in the name of national security and the greater enemy, the Palestinians and were surrounded by Arabs. They have been using that for decades. Once this issue is settled, they will come. They will come unhinged. They have always been afraid of that. Go ahead.
Well, there are many notable instances of Jewish opposition to Zionism, and you mentioned Noam Chomsky. He's a very famous critic of Zionism, and he recalls that he visited Israel during his honeymoon, and he just grew sick of that, the way the state operates and how they treat Palestinians there. It's very unfortunate. Well, I think that it is a very vast topic. If we continue discussing it, we can go for hours and hours and hours, and it is not going to stop. So I think that I have mentioned all the points. If you both have some any final message to share with the viewers, you can do so.
Me, um, from makeup, half done. Um, trying to follow me on TikTok, but I've forgotten what my name is on TikTok. I've just started using TikTok. So maybe you could add a link at the end of the video or something. I don't know. It's just to promote like the ethical brands that have no connections to Israel. I think you don't. But no, I don't have anything else to say. Because once I start, I don't stop, and I'll just keep going on. So I'll just bye. And thank you for the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to thank you too. I'm going to thank Natalie. It was delightful to have a conversation with both of you. Um, it is sad because civilization is not built with mass destruction, wars, and genocide and killing children. That's not civilization. Civilization is built through the creative endeavors of all people. Um, and you can't have that if war becomes a way of life. And you can't have that when you have an apartheid society, as Natalie mentioned. Many people, including Jews who are critics of Israel. I'm thinking of Norman Finkelstein, by the way. I've been mentioning Noam Chomsky, uh, but Norman Finkelstein has also been very critical. Um, who actually would agree with Nancy. Her characterization of Gaza is basically a massive concentration camp. Here, there are many who believe that Gaza is nothing but a massive prison camp. I mean, uh, and by the way, who happen to be Jewish, so it's not just non-Jews. So my view is that unfortunately, I don't have a pessimistic scenario. In the short term, I'm afraid that there will not be uh, any resolution to this, considering that Netanyahu has both political parties in the United States, both the Republicans, the GOP, and the Democrats, um, in basically inf- influences both through the various corporate entities, in individual billionaires, as well as, of course, APEC. I just don't see it because when you look at the money that has flowed into their campaign funds, it's very difficult to see how, when they go in the House or the Senate, how they vote differently other than to send aid to Israel. So they actually, a lot of people think, well, they spend a lot of money. They spend hundreds of millions, yeah, but that's just an investment. They spend that, and the return is in the hundreds of billions. They may spend 100 million, but the return is billions sent, taxpayer money, by the way, back to Israel, and military and economic aid, guaranteed loans for a lot of those housing projects in the settlements in Palestinian lands. I don't see that changing either with Kamala Harris or with Donald Trump. I don't. I agree with Nancy. I read the Macron story. I was encouraged. I then saw what Israel did, immediately retaliated, immediately denouncing Macron. I hope that other European leaders follow. I saw that Ireland, by the way, the is moving in that, at least expressed sympathy with what Macron is doing. I'm hoping more Europeans break from the partner across the pond there, from the United States. I'm hoping that they break. I'm hoping that they say enough is enough. Enough is enough. This has been going on for a year. The military solution, ethnic cleansing pursuit, has done nothing except wipe out a lot of people. As Natalie points out, by the way, I want to comment on that before we go. She's absolutely right. The official statistics, by the way, the official statistics, we won't know the real statistics. The official statistics are those, and they are from the health ministry, the health department of the Palestinian Authority, but which gets it from Gaza, uh, from Hamas officials, but they're backed by the United Nations, basically endorses that. However, she's absolutely right. There have been a lot of people, and the way they're counted is not the way they count deaths. It's also important. If I die of starvation because the Israelis are not allowing, as we have found out, humanitarian aid, they were lying about it. Just the other day, the CNN reporter asked Netanyahu point blank, "You're not allowing aid." He said, "We're allowing more aid," and he started um, throwing out statistics about how much aid there. Well, if that's the case, then why the United Nations and the World Health Organization uh, position regarding uh, infectious diseases? um, and from malaria to other diseases and famine in Gaza. So I believe that the situation is not. I'm sorry to say. I know it's terrible. Is not going to improve in the short term. In the longer term, I believe that that Israel will basically undermine itself with the policies it's found. It's alienating the rest of the world. Most of the world governments and most of the population of the world, which is 8 billion people, is not on the side of Israel. It's on the side of the Palestinian people. It's on the side of the victims. And Israel and its policy of apartheid and ethnic cleansing, longer term, is not going to prevail. And one reason is because of the role of China, Russia, and the BRICS.
Mm. And social media. Yeah, because
Well, yes.
I was going to say,
Yes, you can continue, please.
I've seen something on TikTok earlier, and some of the people who speak up pro Palestine, you get very familiar with the attitude of the Israeli people. And I know there's a very small minority that aren't fascist. A very small minority, not that credentials above my service. And you get this attitude every time because you don't know who's going to pop up on the screen, so it's random. And all of the Israelis pop up, they're all obnoxious, brainwashed. They all believe that what they're doing is absolutely right.
Mhm.
This,
That's a good point. The dogmatism. That's a good point.
you, as soon as they come on the screen, their body language, I just think they're going to be obnoxious. They laugh. It's almost like, when you're really young and you've not had any life challenges, and
Yeah.
you don't know what it is to suffer or to feel pain or to really feel something, and they're really cocky and arrogant, and they have this bombastic attitude, and they are like that, and they absolutely defend what they're doing, and it's so ugly. And this is why the world seems to hate them, because we can see their attitude. And as soon as you try to have an intelligent conversation with somebody like that, like, well, I won't even go into the ones I've had, but what about this? Can't you just sit back and take a look at this factual information? What do you think about this? And they just cannot compute or don't want
Yeah.
to.
No, they don't. They reject it. Anything that's outside the realm of Zionism is automatically rejected.
Mm. There must be a few Israelis that aren't like that, but the majority.
Oh, there are, by the way, there are. Assad is absolutely correct. The society, I mean, the West may try to present them as a homogeneous. There are critics of Netanyahu. There are critics of Zionism inside of Israel and globally in the Jewish diaspora. There are. And there are people who actually spend money out of their pocket to bring social justice and human rights to the Palestinian people. So there are, I pointed out, I just gave one example because this person was in the same field as I am. The woman who was fired, who is Jewish in Pennsylvania, she lost her job. She was tenured, by the way. It's nearly impossible, believe me, in the United States to lose your job if you have tenure. You have to kill somebody. And she lost her job.
Don't see many people in Israeli society. They don't. You see them all protesting Netanyahu with the great big Israeli flags, but you don't see them protesting Palestinian
That's a
rights.
good point. That's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that point. There are critics of Netanyahu who simply want Netanyahu replaced with another face who will continue an apartheid and ethnic cleansing, a softer, gentler Zionism. That has been written about. That's a good point. There are also people who reject Zionism. as Assad mentioned. There are people who reject Zionism. There are people who just want Netanyahu out. So there are people who want systemic change, and there are people who want change of personalities at the head of the of government. You're absolutely right. That's true. Yeah, they're waving the flag. They want somebody else in there who is going to be who's going to have a policy that doesn't present Israel. I'll tell you a quick story here. I had a contact from an Israeli friend who is now in the States, and he was alarmed, but he was saying, and I can understand that. Oh, they're going to turn against all of us simply because what that government is doing. I'm not with the government. So there's also the concern on the part of a number of Israelis as well as Jews in the diaspora. Oh, we're all going to suffer now because of what that government did. Although some of us are critics, whether it's they're soft critics, then replace Netanyahu with somebody else, but continue the policies, or they're systemic, structural critics, get rid of Zionism altogether, go ahead with a two-state solution, give them sovereignty, um, let's end apartheid. So there is the element of why are you creating conditions for the rise of anti-Semitism, which is the ultimate paradox here, and that is that the Zionist state has been responsible for the rise of anti-Semitism in the last year, globally. Globally, I have a friend in South Korea, and she doesn't distinguish. I mean, it's amazing. She doesn't distinguish between the Zionists and an average Jewish person. I mean, who is against? There are Jews who have suffered as a result of this. So they lump them together. It's they're all the same. They're not. They're not. It's true. It's true what you're saying. In Israel, most of the people are with the side of the government. There is the element, Natalie and Assad, both of you know this very well. There is the element, when a country is at war, you rally around the flag. You don't, otherwise, if you don't support your own country, it's at war. For Christ's sake, you have to support your own country. So there is that. There's the element of nationalism. But then when you add religion to it, it becomes a powerful weapon. You see, Assad.
Yes, in fact, you just said that these people use religion to promote their nationalistic ideologies and I remembered in a session you said that the neoliberals are using religion to
Yes.
promote to achieve their goals, their capital goals, and they manipulate people
Yeah, I
like the
think
people in clergy.
when we
They
did,
do that.
yeah, yeah. When we did, I believe I said when we did a session on neoliberalism and culture, I think that was the session where I mentioned,
Exactly, exactly. That's it.
yeah, and I
Neoliberalism, culture, and society.
culture,
Yes.
and I think that, and religion, of course, is part of culture. Yeah, the neoliberals have been notorious about, from the early neoliberal intellectuals like Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, um, who were very keen on using culture as a vehicle to manipulate public opinion and to draw people in. And religion, of course, is a very powerful, let's face it, I mean, religion is a very powerful tool um, uh, to use to have people on your side. And it has, whether it's Hinduism in Modi's India, who is a neoliberal, by the way. So you have Hinduism being used to promote the, or evangelicals in the United States. Excuse me. Uh, it, the fact is, and even Islam in Indonesia, okay. So yeah, religion has been used. And here in this case, Zionism has also been, by the way, Israel has been following neoliberal policies since the late 80s, since I think Reagan, in Reagan's second term, they've gone that route. I remember there was an excellent session in Washington, D.C. that I attended years ago. A number of years ago, it was a Jewish a scholar who was very much pro-Palestinian, more pro-Palestinian than some of the Arab speakers on the panel that day, who argued that our focus should really be on how Zionists have been using neoliberalism, because the the fact is that neoliberalism is about the political economy, and that's where the money is, and money is power, as Natalie pointed out earlier. And without that, you can't have those bombs, and you can't put those settlements in Palestinian lands. They, yeah, they've been very, very successful in merging religion and the political economy of their liberalism. Yeah.
I'm extremely
Unfortunately, the way
thankful.
I, oh,
Yes,
I'm
yes,
sorry, go ahead.
yes, sir, please. I'm
No,
sorry, I'm
no,
sorry. Please, you can continue.
no. I was going to say, unfortunately, part of neoliberalism has been in the case of, and we did a session on child labor, and I don't know if I mentioned that at that at that time, but a lot of people may not be aware that some of the settlers, the Israeli settlers, had used Palestinian children. Child labor has been a part of, and Natalie mentioned children at the outset, where exploiting children's labor in the settlements has been part of the neoliberal model in Israel. Not that it's the only one. I mean, they do it in, we know that they do it in the United States. They do it all over the world. They do it in Africa. We did the thing about chocolate and child labor and mining operations down in Zaire in the Congo.
Mm.
Um, so, but the Israeli neoliberals have used this model to exploit Palestinians even more in terms of relegating them to second-class citizens, exploiting their labor, okay, and using children, which, by the way, it's a human rights violation according to the United Nations. Using child labor is a violation of international law.
Well, they violate all international laws. They don't care. They don't give a damn about international
And
laws.
it should it, fucking oh, like shooting on a daily basis on with it. Like, honestly, like for children throwing stones, they can be shot in the head and nothing happens to them. And it's done journalist culture was do documentaries on this. It's been going on for decades with the support of the British government. I'm just like, what? I actually thought I thought we were meant to be pro human rights. I think this last year I realised that my government are anything but pro human rights. The more you learn, the more you realise what they've actually been involved in, and it is.
The rhetoric is there and the facade is there for democracy, for human rights and social justice, but the policies and the result of the policies indicate something else. Yeah, there's the facade and there's the rhetoric. We're democratic, we're civilized, we're pro human rights, we're pro social justice. Okay, is that reflected in the real world? No, and that's what you got to judge them. When I work, they judged me every semester, by the results of my work, the tangible, not what I said, but what I actually did. You know, that's what you judge every government with. And when they talk a good game, you have to say, okay, what are the results?
It seems to be like large amounts of money involved. It's just it's completely they're completely above the law. That's it. And it's a challenge to hold them accountable that might take years and lots of education and lots of pressure, because when there's that amount of power and money involved, it's going to be a really difficult challenge, because they're just going to, like, who's going to hold them accountable? Like,
There is no accountability for people with that kind of power. There is no accountability.
well, it's like friend said, you know, I'm so glad the ICC does exist and the ICJ, which are two different things. I was a
They
bit
ignore they ignore the ICC. The ICC and the ICJ are wonderful, but they're there for the enemies of the West.
it's
They're
good.
not going to go. They're not going to do anything to Israel. I
Even,
am glad, by the way, I agree with you. I'm glad that they did what they did, because even symbolically, it sends a message to the world.
yeah, and it makes people go, oh gosh, right, how hypocritical. Like,
I agree.
but it also makes it scary, because it's like, it makes it a bit scary how these people are everything, and if they wanted to do whatever they want, they sort of try and do it, don't they? Which is probably what they're gonna do. But I suppose the only tool we boycott.
Okay.
Okay, I'm extremely thankful to both of you for sharing your opinions, and I'm also thankful to the viewers for sharing, for watching us, and we have presented the perspectives of our guests on the 1 year war of between Israel and Hamas, or unfortunately the Palestinian people, unfortunately the Lebanese people, unfortunately the people of Yemen, the people of Syria, and we are exploring the possibility of a potential third world war, which should not happen. Which should not happen. We have already witnessed a massive destruction of humanity in the two world wars in the 20th century, and now we don't want to witness it. We don't want to witness it. Now it's up to you to share your opinions in the comment section. And I tried to be neutral. I tried to present this conversation as a neutral host, but unfortunately, it's difficult to ignore the plight of the innocent uh, women, innocent children, unarmed men, how they have been subjected to cruelty. They have been subjected to massacres. They have been subjected to genocide. And it's just these politicians, these political leaders are killing so many people just to achieve their aims. That's very unfortunate. Now it's up to you to share your opinions. I'm thankful to Professor John B. Kofus. I'm thankful to Miss Natalie Potter. I'm thankful to everyone. Thank you for your time. Bye bye.
Thank you.